I'm going to, oh, whoops, I'm clicking through. Going to introduce Leonidas. We are so excited for this poetry workshop. Um, I hope you guys get a lot out of it. I have been like counting down the days. But I wanted to introduce our awesome presenter first. Leonidas is a senior librarian with the lifelong learning team at the county library. Originally from upstate New York, she has been in Utah for a little over 8 years. Her love for poetry began in middle school when she was tasked to write a poem for her English class. And then her first published poem was titled The Water's Edge, which she wrote to be published in the school's poetry collection. That's so cute. She has been a fan of writing and reading poetry ever since. So, Lee, you can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah.
Welcome.
I am super excited. If you've ever met me, I will either talk about poetry or potatoes. Um, so, my two loves. Um, yeah, so my first introduction into poetry was um, probably middle school, maybe a little earlier, but it was definitely lots of Shel Silverstein, Where the Sidewalk Ends, A Light in the Attic. I do have some poetry that's very reminiscent of his work, and E. E. Cummings. So the poem that Hannah had talked about, The Water's Edge, I'm going to use it as an example later because I didn't even know this was a term until I looked it up like 2 weeks ago, but it's called a concrete or visual poem. And you take the poem and you format it into a visual that goes along with your theme of the poem. So I'll explain further later, but I just wanted to throw that out there. I've had several poems published over the years in different anthologies. I do have to say that the first time I ever entered a poetry contest to get published, it was slightly out of spite. My my writing professor told me it wasn't a very good poem. So art is subjective, as we all know, but it was kind of a blow to my ego a little bit. But it's a nice reminder that not everyone's gonna love what you write, what you paint, what you sculpt, how you dance. Um, find the enjoyment for yourself. Because ideally, like that's what art is for, to connect with yourself and with community. Um, on this first slide, I put a quote from Terrence Hayes, who is an amazing poet. I absolutely adore his work. It says, poems are a form of music, and language just happens to be our instrument, language and breath. And I absolutely love this because it encapsulates what you do with the poetry. It's very lyrical. Um, and you use the words, you mold them, and you also use breath and breaks and volume and cadence to really set a tone for people while they're reading. Um, all right, next slide. So what is poetry? Like, we've heard of it, we've read it, we might have rolled our eyes at some of it. I know a lot of things you have to read in school can be a little over your head or a little dry. I'm here to tell you not all poetry is like that. But the definition from the Merriam-Webster dictionary is writing that formulates a concentrated, imaginative awareness of experience in language chosen and arranged to create a specific emotional response through meaning, sound, and rhythm. I almost feel like that's a little bit of a poetry there, right there, just talking about it. And then one of my other favorite poets, Emily Dickinson, I love her definition of poetry. If I read a book and it makes my whole body so cold, no fire can ever warm me, I know that is poetry. Um, which goes along with it creates this emotional response. Um, and I also like to say, if you didn't like it, it still did its job because it created a response in you. And I just think that's great. Um, next slide. Thank you. So why poetry? What, why do I love it so much? What does it do for me? What does it do for other people? Um, I like to tell people it's the only love that's never left, never disappointed. It was never conditional. Um, it was the first time I actually felt like I belonged and that it was okay to feel something. I grew up in a very you know, we don't talk about emotions, like don't cry, like it's not a big deal. Um, and poetry empowered me. It gave me the permission to speak. And I learned once you give yourself the permission to speak, you give others permission to speak. And that's how you grow community and that's how you connect. And your community can look like anything. It doesn't have to be art. It could be D&D. It could be crocheting. It could be your pickleball club. Um, that's your chosen community. That's where you feel safe. That's where you grow. That's where you find joy. Um, so that's why I love poetry. And it not only connects you to a broader audience or new people, but it also connects you to yourself. Um, I know a lot of people, they want to monetize or find value outside of themselves with art. I think you need to initially find it within yourself, connect with it. Because a lot of the times we, as adults, we don't take time to actually absorb what we've seen during the day, what has happened, what's interacted. Especially with technology, we're constantly bombarded with, what's going on in the world, other people's thoughts, um, ads, emails, Slack, all of that. And we never take the time just to be. And poetry is a way for me to take that time to just be, to really, and I also like to say marinate. Um, I like to marinate in the day's broth. Like what has happened? What has, come washed over me? And sometimes it's a week later. Sometimes it's an hour later. I wrote a poem about things that happened to me 25 years ago because I wasn't ready to sit there in that moment and really think about what happened. Um, so I really believe it's a great way to connect with yourself as well. And it's an avenue of questioning and reliving moments. Um, a lot of my poetry, and if you've read poetry, there's a lot of questioning within the poems themselves. And they may not be traditional with a question mark, but you can feel it. You can feel that like uncertainty, doubt, or I need to know more. And writing is a way to find that, to maybe find that answer. And it may not be the answer you want, but it's the answer you might need. And at the end of the day, this is a way to tell your story. And your story is so important. As people, we tend, like I said, we go to our day-to-days and we don't share a lot of ourselves. And that hinders us. Um, I think it's Maya Angelou who says, I'm gonna misquote this slightly because I'm slightly nervous, but she said there's no greater agony than keeping an untold story inside you. I know we've all been there where we can't speak our truth and how diminishing and devastating that might be. Um, this is just a way, and I hope you feel that this is a safe space that you can speak your truth, you can open up, you can share. And it doesn't always have to be life-changing. I have a poem about my love for Taco Bell. It's very short, it's very sweet, it's very simple. Um, it's definitely meant to be performed. And every time I read it, the same reaction happens. I wasn't thinking about it, but now I really want a taco. So, and that's exactly why I wrote it. I want people to share that simple joy I get from going to get a crunchy taco at Taco Bell. Let's see here. Um, Thanks, Sadie. Yes, Taco Bell and potatoes. Yes. They they saved my soul, is what I say. Taco Bell saves my soul. Um, does anybody have like any questions so far, or do you does poetry do that to you as well, or art in general? Um, I know sometimes people, I personally, I think writing poetry is a very social act. I know a lot of people, it's, one thing, it's just them and their thoughts. Um, I have learned to be able to be alone in my thoughts with a room full of people. And I really enjoy that. And I used to go to a writing open mic, and we'd have like time in the beginning of the open mic to write. And it was up in Ogden, so it was like a 45-minute drive. Um, but I'd get there and I'd write a poem for the night, and then I'd get up and I'd perform it. Um, but that was literally my scheduled time to sit and think about what has happened in the week or the day. Um, and it was great. And now I literally have to put it in my calendar, like sit down and write. You need that. Um, yeah. Yes, Jean, some poetry is hard to interpret. There's a lot of metaphor. There's a lot of hidden messages. Um, what I love about poetry is you don't always, it doesn't always have to be the right answer. There's not necessarily a right answer. Um, I may write a poem about, for instance, I wrote a poem about coquito, which is a traditional holiday drink that my grandmother used to make. I wrote it like just in remembrance of that. I took an instance where I took it to a party and introduced it to people that have never had it before. And then I realized that I was actually talking about the fact sharing my culture with people that have not experienced that culture, and that how they couldn't say coquito, so they called it the snowman drink, and how significant that is in our daily lives of how we easily switch things without actually trying to understand. Um, but you could read it and just be like, oh, I kind of want to try that. I like coconut. And that's okay. Like I said, you don't have to find earth-shattering thoughts in there. Kira, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I love that you had put in there about questioning and reliving moments. And so, like, for me, poetry gives always a lot of imagery. I have a crazy imagination. So, like, I'm always putting myself in those words or in those feelings or in a scenario and whatnot. But I love that you said, like, just sitting down and finding time to write. And maybe you'll cover this, like, later in your presentation. But I tend to always feel like if I'm writing, I think too much, I guess, or like trying to find the right words and like it's not flowing. Like, so I don't know how you get around that. So I would be very interested to hear about your writing process.
Yeah, I get writer's block all the time. And I do have lots of ways to try to get around that or through it. Um, and I am going to talk about that. Um, um, I just saw in the chat that Morgan had said there are few greater feelings than when you find a poem or a piece of art that feels like it says it all that you couldn't find the words for. And exactly. I constantly listen to music and read poetry because I don't always have the words to express how I feel. And it's also a way to kind of solidify that I am not alone in those feelings. Okay. Next slide. Okay, poetry forms. There's so many. I tend to naturally do free verse, which it's not rhyming. There's no meter to follow, but there's lots of imagery. I use a lot of alliteration, repetition. What else do I use? Metaphors, personifications, things like that, to really help it along. I also like to use a lot of breaks in my poetry, especially if I'm talking about something where I want that one stanza to stand out. I will make it smaller. I will move it away, just so when I'm reading it or somebody else is reading it, they will see like, oh, this is a little more important. Maybe I should pay attention. Maybe I should slow down. So that's usually the easiest one to do because there's a lot more freedom in what you're writing. Haikus. I love haikus. I actually once won a haiku death battle. It was very impromptu. I was taking a writing class, and the instructors for that class were like, we want to try this out, see if it'll work. So there were 3 of us, and we had to write 5 haikus, and each haiku had a different theme. And I actually have an example later on of one of the haikus I wrote for that. But if you don't know, haiku is a traditional Japanese writing form. It's 3 lines. The first line is 5 syllables, second line is 7 syllables, and the third line is 5 syllables. It tends to be very introspective. There's a lot of nature imagery or animal imagery that's used in haikus. What I've learned in haikus is that I don't always pronounce words correctly. I either add or subtract a syllable. It's amazing. And then sometimes I'm like, I know I'm saying that right. And then I have to look it up and be like, oh, that's actually 3 syllables and not 2. So it's probably why I always dance faster than the music too. Kind of lose that beat a little bit. It's also a very easy form to follow. As long as you get those syllables right, you've got that down. And you don't have to stick to the theme of nature or animals. A narrative poem is like what you think it is. It's a story, but it's using the techniques of poetry. So you have a beginning, you have a middle, and you have an end. I've done this several times. It's actually really nice because I love telling stories, but I am the worst at sitting down to write a story. So poetry is my jam. It's my format. And I give kudos to anybody that can sit down and write a novel or a short story. After like 4 pages, I'm out. I try to do NaNoWriMo, which is the national writing campaign that they do in November. You're supposed to write every day for the month of November. I have a friend to this day will still message me. He's like, hey, is that lady still stuck on the beach? I was like, yeah, she is. She'll probably be there forever. But see, like, I say that because it's okay if you don't finish. Like you are the captain of this. You are the creator. You don't have to finish a piece. If you feel like you're done, then you're done, and it's okay. I have journals filled with unfinished poems that sometimes I go back and I'm like, that line is amazing, and I'm gonna take it and put it in something else. Totally okay. There's no right or wrong in this. The next poetry form I want to talk about is acrostic, um, which I also have an example of later on that I wrote. But acrostic is you take the letter of so you spell out a word vertically, and each letter starts that line of the poem. So a lot of people trying to teach acrostic will have you use your name, and then you write a poem from your name, which is really cool, and I love it. It's always wonderful how people see themselves when they get that chance and they get that ask to write about themselves. Um, Quickly, another kind of modern twist on acrostic is called the golden shovel. That was kind of spearheaded by Terrence Hayes, who I will always talk about. I love him dearly. But he was a huge fan of Gwendolyn Brooks, and I don't know if her poetry was taught in Utah schools, but one of her famous poems is We Real Cool. So what Terrence Hayes did was he took lines from Gwendolyn Brooks' poem, We Real Cool, and the last word of each line of his poem is a word from her poem. And they call it the golden shovel because one of her lines is 7 at the golden shovel. So it's very tied in together, and the theme is tied in together. So if you get a chance, look up Terrence Hayes and Gwendolyn Brooks. I think you'll really enjoy it. Also, if you're a David Bowie fan like me, Terrence Hayes has a poem dedicated to David Bowie called The Blue Bowie, and it's in his collection, Wind in a Box. Next poetry form is blackout. I thought I had grabbed something, but I guess I forgot it at home. But you've probably seen this out and about. I know I've done it for Poetry Month, which is April. National Poetry Month is April. I've done displays where we do blackout poetry. So we take pages from old books that maybe have fallen apart, or you can use articles, anything that's got a good amount of wording on the page. And you just mark out with a black marker what you don't want, and the words you keep create the poem. A lot of people will take that and turn it up a notch and will actually design a picture in it, which I think is just absolutely mind blowing because I'm like, I struggle just trying to like block out everything and make sure I don't like cover up the word I want. So those are really cool and very easy to do. You can do it with any age range. So that's also an easy one. And the last easy form I wanted to talk about is concrete or the visual poem. So there's one, I can't think of the poet right now, but it's in the shape of an apple. And it literally just says apple, 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 apple. And then there's like a space, and in that space it says worm. Um, and that's the poem. And there are other ones that have different shapes that do that, but that's the one that's stuck in my head because that's the one I remember from school. Like I said, I have an example to show you later on when we go. Anybody have any questions about these? Are you familiar with these formats? Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, next slide. All right, haiku. Um, oh, sorry, Jean. No, acrostic doesn't need to rhyme. So haiku, again, nature-based, animal-based, themes 575. It's funny with this one, I actually had to edit it because I realized I had 8 syllables in my second line. Don't tell the judges from the haiku battle. But this is the one I wrote. And where is it? Same. Oh, so the theme was sit still. So we had to write something based off the theme of sit still. Thoughts like a tsunami. Silence. Can I be still now? No, the storm rages on. So that really showcases my mind, which I have like 1,002 tabs open all the time, and being able to sit still and not constantly be aware of all those tabs is kind of hard for me. So, and it can be frustrating and bring up emotions. So that's how that came about. And it's interesting too, and I don't know if this would help or hurt, but sometimes I time myself in writing to force myself to write. Because if you give yourself an unlimited time, that blank page might be your worst enemy. And sometimes if I have a blank page and I really can't get over it, I write the same word over and over and over again until all of a sudden it starts turning into different words. Or I do word association where I'll write dog and then cat and then plant and then squirrel and then, running around and, go from there. But that's sometimes what I will do just so I get my writing time in. It doesn't have to make sense, but at least I took that time to write and I sat still. I have this little pocket book of haikus that were translated from Japanese. And one of my favorites out of that is, even these long days are not nearly long enough for the skylarks to sing. And I love that. Mainly because I have a hard time with the shortened days and winter. But yeah, it's great. Yes, a haiku is 575. Okay, acrostic. I wrote this one really fast the other night because I wanted to have a pretty short example to give you. So you can see that I started off with moon. And then I wrote, Morpheus dances among the clouds, offering luminous dreams. Shadows play across our eyes as memories lead us to nocturnal bliss. I also have insomnia, so I write a lot about nighttime and sleep and things like that. I had a fellow writer that said, if you're struggling to write, just sit down and write what you know, and eventually you'll expand. So I tend to write what I know sometimes, especially if like I'm going off the cuff. But I got the words Morpheus and Luminous from a deck of cards. I got a box of index cards and I just wrote random words on it. And I also used that to kind of give myself inspiration. Yes, sometimes haikus don't follow the 575. A lot of modern poets will play with the rules. Like that's what artists do, right? They're rebels. They don't always follow a format. And that's okay. Like that's what you do, right? You take the medium and you work with it and you see what you can create. I mean, that's how, famous painters did. They didn't all paint the same way. Like one day someone decided like, I don't want to paint that way. I'm going to use oil paints, or I am going to do rough painting, or clearly I don't know enough about painting, but you understand, like, and that's what I love about poetry. I don't have to follow the rules, but I can if I want to, and it's fine. This next example is of a concrete or visual poem. Right? Okay, rereading it after not reading it for quite a few years, I'm like, oh, my 7th grade heart. I was so young, but that's how I wrote it. I wrote it in the shape of waves to kind of emphasize this back and forth, the whooshing of the waves, and just this kind of almost calmness, but not in it. So I'll read this for you, just in case you can't read the online. As I walk along the water's edge, I think of a life I could have lived. Instead of being quiet and alone, I could have had friends to call my own. Friends can go and friends can stay, but why should I care anyway? But now that I think about it, I might find a friend who will always stay with me until the end. So as I walk along the water's edge, I'll never walk home alone again. That's written in rhyming couplets, which is also a very good poetic technique to have. There is a rhythm to it, a calmness, and it's repetitive. So it invokes kind of a comfort to it. Even though I'm questioning things, like, am I always going to not have friends? Am I always going to feel alone? That doesn't have to be like a wrecking question. It could be a calm, comforting way to think about life. Of course, I'm looking at this as an adult, right? As a 7th grader, I was like, oh, that looks so cool. But anybody familiar with visual poetry? Have a favorite, maybe? You can think off of hand? No. Oh, thanks, Jean. Okay. All right. Next slide. Oh, Nissa said she thinks there's one in the shape of a tree. I'll have to look that up because I love trees. Absolutely love trees. I think trees are so symbolic and gorgeous, and you can write for years about trees and the varying trees. So, yeah.
I don't know if that counts as that type of poetry, the visual, the concept. There's one, I can't remember who even wrote it. I think it's a pretty popular one, but it's like when you read it the first time, it has like its message that way, but then it could also be read backwards. And then it has a totally different message. Do you know which one I'm talking about? Does that count as that kind of format?
I think it depends on how it's written. Can't remember what that's specifically called.
Something about beautiful. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But
I've actually written poems like that. That was an exercise we used to do in my writing group where we would use our index cards, and we'd get like a minute for each word. And then at the end of 15 minutes, we'd read our poems, but we'd read them forward and then we read them backwards. Because, as you said, it changes the tone, it changes the meaning. I had one that was very fairy tale influenced. And when I read it forward, they're like, oh, yeah, you're like the hero and this, that, and the other thing. But when I read it backwards, they're like, oh, you're the villain. So it definitely changes the view. There are also other formats where they call it a mirror. where you actually write on 2 different pages, and you skip words, and you can read it in different ways, and it'll convey different meanings, but it's the same poem. So don't be afraid to like play with the words, play with the language, play with how it looks, the breaks in it, the punctuation. Don't be afraid to use other languages, slang. It's they're all tools. They're all tools. One of the things I like to use for inspiration, especially if I have writer's block, is to make a chart. And I was introduced to this in college in my creative writing class. He gave us 5 words, and then we had to write the corresponding words underneath those, and then we had free reign to write whatever we wanted. So I know we had the writing prompts sent out. I don't know if any of you looked at that and tried it out. If you haven't, you can use any of those tables, or I did on the screen pre-fill the first table out. I would like to take the next 4 minutes and have you write, have you all write for the next 4 minutes. And it could be any theme. I saw a writing prompt from Palette Poetry that I follow on Instagram, where it says, write about the magic of the everyday ritual, which I thought was absolutely beautiful. So what do you do every day? Do you make a cup of coffee every day? Do you get up and walk the dog every day? Are you the person that gets everybody up and going for the day? Do you sit and meditate? Do you write? Like, what do you do? Or are you one of those people that immediately has to get up and run and brush your teeth? You can find beauty in these everyday events. So I will stop talking and let you all write. Okay. Time's up. How did that feel, everybody? I see some people still writing. Love it. Did you feel comfortable or did anybody struggle a little bit? Because I was like, you have 4 minutes, go. Um,
It was
that's
so
great.
fun. I loved just like getting my brain thinking about all of these words. I'm kind of fired up. I want to write a little poem now.
Yay, exactly, yes. Awesome. I have one more slide before we go. I don't want to run too much time over. Um, so these are places I go to for inspiration. The Academy of American Poets, poets.org. They actually have a sign up. You can get a poem a day emailed to you. I adore it. I love it. Poetry Foundation, poetryfoundation.org is also a great resource. Um, could not say your local library. Please come. Come find me. Sometimes I'm at Whitmore Library. I will talk poetry with you. Um, it is in the nonfiction 800s, usually beginning at 808. American poetry is 811. If you don't know what those numbers are, that's the Dewey Decimal System, and that's where we shelve the books. You can always ask any staff member, and they'd be happy to show you where those are. And then I just want to give a shout out to my two favorite local open mics. Stage Presence is every Tuesday, 7 to 10 at Clubhouse. If you've never been to Clubhouse, it's a gorgeous venue. I highly recommend. And then Black Butterflies in Kent is hosted by 365 Poetry. They're monthly, usually on a Saturday, 7 to 10 p.m. at the Urban Arts Gallery. Now, both do charge an entrance fee. Um, the Black Butterflies in Kent usually serve African food as well. That's included. But both of those events, open mics, are so welcoming. I always felt safe. I always felt happy, and I always felt rejuvenated. And I felt like I belonged. So I highly recommend. There are so many more. You can always look them up. They usually are on Facebook or Instagram. And there's also places on Instagram like Palette Poetry is a good one to follow. Like I said, they do writing prompts and stuff. So I just want to thank you all so much for sharing this time and the space with me. I wish we had more time. I was enjoying it and I would love to hear or read your poems. So if you would like to share and you feel up for sharing, you can always email me. Um, Let's see here. I was going to write my email in the chat.
I can also send it out after with the presentation.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
This was awesome. Thank you so much. I had the time of my life. One thing that really stuck out to me was what you said at the beginning, that this is just an avenue for like self-connection and connecting with others around you, because it's a form of being able to be vulnerable with others and yourself.
Yes.
So I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.